Chief Executive Lam, I want to talk about the tight border controls. Despite having any new cases in Hong Kong remains shut at a time when cities like Singapore are opening up. What would it take for Hong Kong to open up its border?
Well, I have said in public that our priority now is to resume some normal travel with the mainland. This is the common aspiration of the Hong Kong people, including international business based in Hong Kong. Because if I ask them, your choice of having a headquarters, a regional office in Hong Kong was because of the access to the mainland market. So if I open up the border for the international arrivals, but at the same time you cannot travel into the mainland, that really is not the best arrangement for our business people. So we have a very good and positive meeting between the two sides, that is the Hong Kong and the mainland officials. We have agreed a set of parameters based on which we can move on to the next stage of discussing how we could gradually resume some
What are those parameters,
travel.
Chief Executive Lam? Talk to us about those parameters. Is it 80% vax rate? What are you looking for specifically before you open up? Because investors are concerned. We've heard from the likes of the AmCham saying that, its members may be considering moving out of Hong Kong to places like Singapore.
Well, first of all, our latest company survey showed that the number of overseas and mainland companies based in Hong Kong has not dropped. It actually was a record high in terms of the overseas and mainland offices, and particularly in terms of startup. Now, coming back to the parameters, of course, the two sides are in close discussion, but one would say that it's basically the same things. One is, of course, very high vaccination rate, which I'm sorry to say that we are still lagging behind. My original goal of reaching 70% by the end of September was still not achieved. Right now, we are still not up to 70%, so we have to do a much more better in terms of vaccination, particularly amongst the old people, because you know, based in Singapore, that old people are very vulnerable whenever there is an outbreak. The second is, of course, the infection control measures, both in terms of arrivals and also in terms of preventing a spread in the community. And the third will be the contact tracing. Just in case there is a local case, how effective is the contact tracing regime in order to prevent the widespread infection in community? Another factor is, of course, just in case there is an outbreak, what is the mechanism to suspend it? So there are several things that we need to discuss in detail, and I hope that we will have a second meeting soon.
Just to be sure, once you reach 75%, Hong Kong will open its border.
No, I did not say that. I think no place have adhered to a very strict target of vaccination before opening up. Well, one will have to look into all the circumstances. But I would say that that's very much a precondition that Hong Kong should aim at.
Hong Kong has said that it wants to align its COVID policy with China. What exactly does that entail?
Well, that would, of course, from the mainland perspective, is the practices adopted in Hong Kong should be as aligned as possible with the mainland practices. But they also accepted that we are operating under a very different regime. So the discussions between the two sides are meant to find a way forward that respecting the differences in the systems between the two places, that there could be assurance that we will not be sort of the weak link in terms of COVID-19 control.
I'm just wondering if that also includes perhaps adopting China's tracking applications. Is that something that's been considered?
No, that's not possible. I've said in public that that would not be possible because we do not have that system in place, and it would not be possible to put that system in place just because of a public health crisis.
Executive Lam, we know that Hong Kong is one of the few places in the world right now without a case of the Delta variant. Do you think this is sustainable on a longer-term basis? And if it is not, what are the procedures, what are the measures in place should Delta makes its way to the city?
No, we did have cases of Delta, of course, mainly imported. And as I now speak to you, we just another case of local infection, probably because of dealing with air cargo. So there is always that risk because the Delta variant is highly infectious, and most of the cases infected are asymptomatic. So if one of those cases went into the community, there is indeed a very high risk of an outbreak. But let me put it that way, Haslinda. When you said that Hong Kong is one of the few places that have very stringent rules, while very low cases, but Hong Kong is also one of the places that everybody resumed to normal activities, going to concerts, raising, sports activities, and very soon we will relax more on the gym operations. So we rank very high in terms of normalcy index. So people are enjoying their life in Hong Kong, except travel.
But Chief Executive Lam, for Hong Kong to remain a international financial hub, it has to be open not just to China, but the rest of the world. Are you concerned perhaps that your competitiveness will be impacted because Singapore is opening up and there's great competition between the two cities? Might Hong Kong lose its competitiveness?
Of course, I am concerned, and we are working very hard to resume normal travel in a gradual and orderly manner, both with the mainland of China and with overseas places. But as a chief executive in Hong Kong, I am also duty-bound to protect my people. So any fatality or increase in fatality will cause a major concern in society. So in dealing with the public health crisis, we have a lot of factors to take into account. It could not be just a single factor of a financial center. But coming back to financial center, I think Bloomberg knows better than everybody that we are doing very well, right? Our IPO in the first 6 months was 80% more than the same period last year. We issue more bonds, and in 2 days' time, we are welcoming the first bond in renminbi to be issued by a city in the mainland, that is the city of Shenzhen. And the turnover is good, and the currency is very stable. The banks are doing well. So we are not going down the drain in terms of our financial services industry.
The market activity is slowing down, though, but I'll pick up on that slightly later. I want to bring your attention to the housing crisis in Hong Kong. You talked at length during your policy speech on the northern metropolis that you are intending for 2.5 million people. Talk to us about when construction will start, when it will end, what it will cost taxpayers.
The northern Metropolis is an existing geographical area in Hong Kong consisting of 2 administrative districts called the North District and the Yuen Long District. So when we said that when the Northern Metropolis is fully developed in accordance to this, with this development strategy, it will have 2.5 million. At the moment, there have been almost 1 million or more people living in these 2 districts. So the Northern Metropolis is actually trying to put together in a very coherent, strategic and visionary way how we want this 300 square kilometers area to develop. And 300 square kilometers is about 1/3 of Hong Kong's landmass. And right next to this northern metropolis is this booming city of Shenzhen. So for the first time in a chief executive's policy address, we are looking beyond the border, so to speak, to find a synergy between Hong Kong and Shenzhen and to release more land for not only housing,
but give us a sense of when construction will start
for industry.
Executive Lam?
Well, construction is right now on with some of the housing projects because it is not an entirely new piece of land. It already has 1 million people living there. It has 110 jobs now in the northern metropolis. So we are building on that basis, but as I said, in a more coherent and strategic vision, and very much with Shenzhen in mind, and also wanting this area to integrate better into the mainland development.
Investors and analysts are not quite convinced that this will lead to lower housing prices. In fact, some are saying that prices could rise as much as 15%. How comfortable are you at the continuation of rising prices of property in Hong Kong?
Well, in tackling the housing problem in Hong Kong, my housing policy is we try to provide public housing to a larger proportion of the population. So 4 years ago, I have started to review the housing policies, and now we have a housing ladder that provides subsidized housing up to the middle income, or even higher than the middle income group, in terms of what I call the starter home. Okay, so in a way, you can say that we are moving closer to the Singapore model, where the HDB flats account for a much larger proportion of the population. In our case, we will be looking after, hopefully, 70%. Right now, the public housing accounts for 47%. So in future, more land produced by the government, whether in the northern metropolis or in the artificial islands of East Lantau, will be allocated for public housing, whether it's for sale or for rental.
The key issue is pricing. If prices continue to escalate, are there measures you would put in place to put a lid on it?
Well, this government has already adopted in previous terms what we call demand management measures. But if there is a strong demand for private housing in a metropolitan like Hong Kong, as in the case of New York and London, then the government's responsibility is to look after those who could not afford to buy in the private market. That's what I told you. In the public subsidized sale market, the pricing is low. I have loaded it further. For example, the latest batch of home ownership flats that we sell were 26% lower than the previous pricing mechanism, because I have delinked it from the private market. So I just set the prices for the subsidized sale flats based on affordability of my people. So as long as I could take care of that big portion of the Hong Kong population, I would not and I should not control everything in the private market, because Hong Kong is a free economy, and we prosper on being an international financial center where a lot of investment wants to come in.
You're looking at 2.5 million in the northern metropolis from 1 million currently. That means, if you calculate it, you're expecting 1 in 5 Hong Kongers from outside that area to be gravitating towards the northern metropolis. Is this a fair assumption, or are you looking at a population growth to meet 2.5 million people there?
No, it's always difficult to project or predict population growth in Hong Kong. By the current projection, perhaps we will reach about 8 to 8.5 million in 20 years' time. So one would ask, perhaps we don't need all this 1 million flats for that modest increase in population. But no, Haslinda, Hong Kong people are living in very congested living space. I'm sure you have heard about it. So I have an aspiration to provide more spacious living environment for my people. So if we knock down the old congested urban units, then we will have the new, more spacious housing units for them to live in. And since you mentioned about 2.5 million residents, I may as well say that we aim to produce 650,000 jobs in the northern metropolis, which is 5 times more than the current job provision. The intention is to spread out Hong Kong so that it will not be a single way, that people living in the north will always have to come to the south, to central, to Causeway Bay, to Tsim Sha Tsui for their job. And where do the jobs come from? One is innovation and technology. We are building a much bigger technopole, just like the Silicon Valley in the northern. We are moving some government offices into the northern district, and we're building a modern business center together with Shenzhen Qianhai.
Executive Carrie Lam, we know that it is an ambitious housing plan, and you said before that You'll ensure bureaucrats will implement it properly. You'll make it your priority. Is that a sign perhaps that you may be running for another 5-year term to ensure the northern metropolis comes to fruition the way you envision it?
No, that is not a sign of anything, but my experience tells me that because we are not a government of political parties, so policies are pretty consistent in Hong Kong. So once a chief executive has laid out a policy, a blueprint that is welcomed by the people, the chances of it's being implemented despite a change in government, despite a change in leadership, are very high. So I'm not worried, especially we have a very solid and professional civil service to do the actual implementation.
At the height of the protest, you volunteered to resign, but Beijing convinced you to stay on. Will you stay on? Will you run for another 5-year term if Beijing wants you to?
I don't answer those speculative questions, Haslinda. You have tried it a few times. I am still giving you a no answer.
A wall of worries for international investors, among them the anti-sanctions law. Lots of speculation. It's been delayed, whether or not it is on the back burner or whether or not it is dead. Talk to us about what's happening with the anti-sanctions law.
Now, first of all, the anti-sanctions law is a piece of national legislation. So there is a mechanism for national legislation to be applied to Hong Kong by an act of inclusion into the Annex 3 to the Basic Law by the National People's Congress Standing Committee. Secondly is nobody could dispute the extension of this law to Hong Kong if needed, because this whole round of sanctions by the United States arose out of Hong Kong. I am a sanctioned officer. I'm still an officer being sanctioned. So the time will come that if Hong Kong is put in that sort of situation, then of course we will follow the central authorities' direction to implement any anti-sanctions measures. But third point I want to make is I want to assure people
so what you're saying is that the anti-sanctions law will be implemented in Hong Kong?
Now, I'm telling you the most important point. The most important point is I have been given to understand that the anti-sanctions law at the national level is a toolbox. And in extending a toolbox to the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region, the central government will take full account of Hong Kong's unique status, especially her status as an international financial center. So the final point is I have no timetable.
Is it fair to say, Executive Carrie Lam, that all these laws are out of your hands? It is in the hands of the government in Beijing?
Of course, because it's a national legislation, just like the national security law. We must not forget that Hong Kong is an inalienable part of the People's Republic of China. I have due accountability to the people of Hong Kong and to the Central People's Government. So if there are national interests at stake, then of course Hong Kong as a part of the People's Republic of China will follow the national instruction and directive. But again, as I told you, the central authorities attaches huge importance to the success of one country, two systems. So whatever they do, they will be very careful in making sure that it will not undermine one country, two systems. It will not even arouse unnecessary speculations and negative perception about Hong Kong practicing one country, two systems and preserving her unique strengths.
Right. When we spoke 2 years ago in Davos, you said that Beijing had no intention of tightening its grip on Hong Kong. Has that changed?
That has not changed. We are still alive and practicing one country, two systems with our rights and freedoms being safeguarded under the Basic Law. And I may just add that I have been in close contact with some overseas chambers recently. And they all said that the national security law is no longer something of their concern. They're concerned about opening up for travel.
I want to touch the market since you touched on it slightly earlier. What is it about Hong Kong that makes it an international financial hub and not a Chinese financial center with perhaps just a little bit more freedom?
Because we have a lot of traditional strengths. One is, of course, our open economy. We don't have any capital controls. Second is our rule of law. Third is, of course, the independence of the judiciary. Fourth is Hong Kong is a very safe city. Fifth is we have a large pool of talents, ranging from financial talents to legal talents. And sixth is our connectivity with the rest of the world and our being a very international place where we can easily link up with the outside world. Then we have very robust regulatory regimes in banking, in securities, and also in insurance. Now, all these strengths are not and could not be easily matched by a mainland city.
Does Hong Kong have any freedom at all to set its own policies?
Of course, Haslinda. I've been sitting in this job as chief executive for 4 years and 3 months. I'm making my policies under the high degree of autonomy. Somebody speculated that this Northern Metropolis development strategy, because it helps Hong Kong to integrate into the mainland, it enhances Hong Kong-Shenzhen collaboration, that it was imposed from Beijing. I can tell you here 100%, this Northern Metropolis development strategy was formulated in Hong Kong by me and my colleagues. And I only show it to Beijing and to Shenzhen a couple of days before release. Yeah.
As far as the market's concerned, all eyes on Evergrande. How is Hong Kong preparing for a possible contagion fallout from Evergrande? And what are you hearing from the authorities in Beijing about Evergrande?
Sorry, I can't hear you now. It's a bit rusty here. What are you talking about?
We're talking about Evergrande. Since we're talking about the markets, all eyes, investors are looking at how the Evergrande fallout may impact Hong Kong. How are you preparing for that possible contagion? And what are you hearing from the authorities in Beijing?
I can only comprehend part of your question, so I try to answer based on my inadequate comprehension of your question because of the equipment. Now, you mentioned something about contagion. I think Hong Kong is very proud of our own regulatory system. We have very strong safeguards, so we can stand any pressure and any interference from outside based on our own system. And if there are things that concern the relationship between Hong Kong and the mainland, then we will make sure that Hong Kong's system remain as robust as ever, because a very strong regulatory system in Hong Kong and a very vibrant capital market in Hong Kong is actually beneficial to the deepening and opening up of the mainland capital markets. This has been acknowledged by the senior officials in central government and also put in practice by all these connectivity schemes that we have, one after another: Stock Connect, Bond Connect, Wealth Connect, and maybe hopefully there will be other connectivity schemes that will be announced.